I'm Pastor Steve Talmage at Love of Christ Lutheran Church in Mesa, Arizona. Each week, Pastor Nanette Christofferson or I provide you an introduction to two of the lectionary readings for the upcoming Sunday. We're going to look at the first lesson for Sunday, August 11th, 2024. It's a brief look at 1 Kings chapter 19, 4 through 8. You're going to be invited to read all of 19, and actually chapters 16 to 22 cover this kind of period of challenge and change in the life of the kings. Background on Kings, I'm taking this from the Lutheran Study Bible, which is a great Bible with nice footnotes and aligns with our Lutheran understanding of how we read the scriptures, and there are other resources in that Bible. But when we look at the history portion of the Old Testament, every historian writes from a distinct viewpoint. This perspective guides the historian in selecting materials to include in an account and in identifying the significance of the story. So, modern biblical scholars believe the long story of the people of Israel in the Promised Land is written from the perspective of the book of Deuteronomy, the second giving of the law, after a lot of this history has already been lived out. And the book of Deuteronomy is recaptured and recovered, calling the people back to be the people that God intended them to be when they first landed in the Promised Land. And so it's through the lens of Deuteronomy, as we read Joshua, Judges, and 1st and 2nd Samuel, we see the formation of the nation of Israel. As they cross in under Joshua, they settled the territory with the various leaders that are brought forward under the book of Judges. And then we have the origin of the first king Saul, then followed by David and Samuel, and then Solomon. And then we have Samuel, the first prophet, that's called by God to help guide and direct this whole process. What's the story? History tells the story of kingdom and monarchy. We get Saul, David, and Solomon, and then we have crisis. And the crisis is that the monarchy, the 12 tribes, are divided through civil war following Solomon's death. In 722, before the Common Era, Assyria, on their way to Egypt, take and destroy the northern tribes of Israel, the 10 tribes that split off to claim the northern territory. They're gone, and they're under Assyria. The Assyrians were on their way to the southern tribes in Judah, but then they had an internal crisis that caused them to pull back, and then eventually the Babylonians come in, and 587 BCE, they march all the way to Jerusalem, and they destroy the walls of the city, they tear down the temple, and they put the remaining descendants of Israel in exile. The present form of the Book of Kings probably was written in the mid-6th century after both North and South have fallen. So that shapes the perspective, and it's really addressing the why. How did this happen? Given our history from Exodus, being set free from slavery and bondage under Pharaoh, being provided for in the wilderness, and then brought into the Promised Land and able to settle and become a unified nation under King David, and then build this glorious temple under King Solomon, how do we find ourselves now in exile? And our city, our home, the place where the temple was built, the capital of our nation, destroyed. What's the story? King offers an explanation of the downfall and exile. While numerous references are to the people's sins, the focus in Kings is on the few rulers who stayed true to God's law and the many who did not. In Jewish tradition, the two books of Kings are considered one unit. So the Jewish Bible wouldn't have 1st and 2nd Kings. The writer of Kings uses major events and the reigns of kings to mark a period which covers almost 400 years. What's the message? Well, there are two major issues in the kings, the history of the kings. First, there was clear affirmation that sacrificial worship should be conducted only in the temple in Jerusalem, because that was the designated spot at the beginning. And secondly, Israel should worship only one God. It's the first commandment. You shall have no other gods before me. But as you read Kings, as you read 1st and 2nd Samuel, as you read 1st and 2nd Chronicles, you're going to see that the people of God and the leaders that are in charge, because of political, economic, military alliances, tolerate and even practice idolatry. John Maxwell, a 20th century, he's still alive, leadership guru, says everything rises and falls with leadership. The stories of the kings are windows into the responsibilities and consequences that rest in either faithful or faithless leaders. Consider our own context. We rise and fall based on the health, vitality, and clarity and courage of our leaders, doing what's right for the common good and not just special interest or themselves. There's a thread of the promise God makes to David's line to continue. So the people of Israel are shaped and formed that no matter the chaos and the conflicts, that God's always going to have a king from the line of David over us. And there's always the hope we can return to the glory days of King David, when we were a united people under one God. Solomon dies in 1 Kings chapter 11. In chapter 12, the northern tribes secede because Solomon's son was unrelenting when it comes to reducing taxes and freeing those folks who have been put into forced labor to do the great buildings of Solomon, the building program. When Rehoboam actually increased the pressure and the taxes, Jeroboam with others supported the secession. And so this united nation that God worked so hard to get to through God's rebellious people, or as Israel means, one who wrestles with God, now they're a divided kingdom. And Jeroboam sets himself up as king, and he establishes Shechem as the capital, and then Bethel and Dan become holy sanctuaries because the people can't go back to Jerusalem and worship in the temple, so they need to have alternative places. But unfortunately, as they set up these high places, there is a tolerance and even a practice of worshiping golden calves, which takes us all the way back to the wilderness story after the Exodus, when Moses is on Mount Sinai too long. The people of God are getting frustrated and wondering, are they just going to be left out here to die? And so Aaron, Moses' brother, collects all the jewelry, and they craft and form this golden bowl that they can worship. And Moses comes down and he breaks the tablets. He's so angry at the lack of faith and patience the people of God demonstrated. Well, here we are. Now we're looking at probably 700 years later, maybe 500 years later, and they're doing it again. Jeroboam refuses to turn away from his evil ways, even though prophets are sent to tell him, and leading people to worship idols away from Jerusalem. So there is a familiar phrase as you read through the book of 1st and 2nd Kings. You're going to see the king did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, or the king did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And as I said earlier, the majority of these anointed leaders of God's people did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And guess what? The people followed their evilness. Our lesson sits in a section, 1 Kings 16:29 to 22:40, where we have the prophet Elijah, we have King Ahab in the north, married to a non-Jew, Queen Jezebel, who is a devout follower of the pagan god Baal. And then we have these prophets of Baal that are running the religious empire up in the northern territory. And then we also, following Elisha, comes Elisha. He hands the baton off in this section to Elisha, as Elisha's growing old and is going to die. So 1 Kings 19:1-3, leading into our lesson. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, "So may the gods do to me and more also, if I do not make your life like the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." Then he was afraid, got up and fled for his life, came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah. He left his servant there. So, a little earlier, you're going to have that great mountain experience on Mount Carmel where Elijah takes on the 500 prophets of Baal, and we see God demonstrate who God is through Elijah, and Elijah actually slaughters 500 prophets of Baal who are devotees to Jezebel, and she is livid, and so she wants to get ahead. She wants to get Elijah ahead, and he does what any of us probably would do: hightail it out of there. He knows he's a wanted man. There's a bounty on his head. So I give you a map, and he he runs down to Beersheba in the south, to Judah, which would be a safer territory for him to be because of the division between the two countries. Then we get into our lesson. Elijah has fled to Mount Horeb. He's depressed, persecuted, he's ready to die. But in the midst of this horrific wondering if I'm the only faithful person in the world, does anybody care? Has my life been in vain? I'm ready to die. God says, I'm not done with you. And there are other people around that you don't know yet. And there's work still to be done. And this is something that all of us need to hold on to in the craziness of the world in which we're living, in the nation in which we are so polarized and divided and anxious about an election, of what's going to happen next. We have to realize that we're not the only ones in this, that God has other faithful people around us. And that's why coming to worship is critical, to realize we're not alone. And then there's work to be done. In good times and bad times, there is work to be done. Verse 4, but he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, drops off his servant. He came and sat down under a solitary broom tree, asked that he might die. It is enough now, O Lord, take away my life, for I'm no better than my ancestors. The despair is clear. 5-6, then he lay down under the broom tree and fell asleep. Suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, get up and eat. He looked, and there at his head was a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. He ate, drank, and lay down again. He's still kind of despondent. Then the angel of the Lord came a second time, touched him and said, get up and eat, otherwise the journey will be too much for you. So God has got work for Elijah to do, and God is sending messengers to feed him and sustain him and encourage him and tell him, get moving. He got up, ate and drank. Then he went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the Mount of God. That must have been some super protein drink that he drank for 40 days and 40 nights. But we get this linkage to Moses and the 40 years in the wilderness, to Noah, 40 days and 40 nights on the ark, and then even a foretaste of Jesus being in the wilderness for 40 days. This time of preparation, this time where trials and temptation are real, but God is there providing. God is able to give us the strength that one needs to do what God wants us to do. So it goes to Mount Horeb, the Mount of God, for further revelation. The work of the prophet was never easy, and Elijah represents the difficulties and challenges when our nation is in crisis, there's conflict, and there's competing pressures to chase after other gods. But God is always going to continue to call faithful people and communities of faithful people to continue the path and the witness and the call to become a blessing in order to be a blessing, as God has first blessed us. So, God bless you on your journey ahead. Read 16 through 22 to get a capture of the whole story. And thank God Elijah did what he needed to do. And the story continued. Take care. God bless.